Then children were brought to him that he, Jesus, might lay his hands on them and pray. The disciples rebuked the people. But Jesus said, "Let the children come to me, and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven." And he laid his hands on them and went away.
So, two things that came to mind just before we get into this text. One is that we had the same song, hymn, in our first meeting, our communion service, and just right now, Jesus loves me. And there is a story, it's a true story, that just emphasizes how fundamental that particular message or song is. There's a fellow, his name is Karl Barth, B-A-R-T-H, and he is without a doubt the most famous, influential theologian, Christian theologian of the last century, no doubt. So much so that I think he made it to the cover of Time magazine in 1962. So, you theologians out there, that might be a little bar for you to aspire to. And he was questioned once. I'm not sure whether it was the press. I'm not sure whether it was at one of his conferences where he had all his fellow theologians around, and here he is, the man, and he's got status, and he's got a good grasp of the world and God's influence on the world, and he's turned from liberal theology to a living relationship with Jesus. And they asked him, what is the most important or biggest, or your biggest revelation that you've found in your long career as a scholar? And he said, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. So I think that's important. Second thing is when this particular text became available, because sometimes Albert puts all of the texts and then what we're preaching, and this one I came up and I kind of said, oh, that'll be good. It's very short, and I just resonate. I've always resonated with the idea of children. In one way, it is kind of a little, it's not a worldview, but it's a shell, it's a framework that I sort of see myself as. I kind of view myself, I feel the same, seem to feel the same as when I was in kindergarten, on a few ways. I'm always getting, or frequently I'm getting in trouble with adults. That happens. And told off. That happens frequently as well. Of course, it's done out of love and all of that good stuff. But that's one thing. The other thing is the world just seems still so big. There's just so much to learn. There's so much out there. And the more you learn, the more you know that you don't know. And it's just so big. And of course, when you go back to your grade school and see where you actually used your sled or your toboggan, it seems only 2 meters. But back then, the world was big. And for me, it's still extremely big. And then just this curiosity. An amazing world God's given us, and the ability just to be curious about everything. So I'm in sync with this text. Matthew's gospel has already spoken about children, so there's nothing new I'm going to bring out, really. I think we've been reading through Matthew's gospel. We've been considering Jesus as the Saviour King, and as part of his kingdom, he uses children as an example or analogy or something tangible that represents his kingdom and what his subjects or citizens or friends or family should be like. In Matthew 18, he calls a child to himself, and he says, "Truly I say to you, unless you're converted and become like a child, you will not enter the kingdom." And then he says, "Whoever receives a child in my name receives me." So these are very fundamental ideas. That if you're not going to come in like a child, you are not in the kingdom. Secondly, if you receive a child in my name, you are in fact, in essence, receiving me. And then watch out how you handle children. Don't despise them. Don't make sure they're seen and not heard. Don't abuse them, because if you despise them, there are angels out there, and they will do their work. And then finally, the generosity, the expansive nature of God's love is demonstrated, that not one child should perish. And I just want to bring that to our attention. Luke says, and this is in Matthew's gospel, this is also in Luke's gospel. In Luke's gospel, it says they were even bringing their babies to him. So just some thoughts about kids and children. There's lots of quotes about children. I think each of us probably have them, because we've all been children, and maybe we've been parents, or we're aunts and uncles, or some of us now are grandparents, and we have a few great-grandparents around as well. So here are 3 little random quotes that I picked out that I thought would be at least interesting to get our brains going. You might know this fellow, Mr. Bean. He became quite famous for being kind of silly and stupid and singing hymns loudly in church and all of those things. And he just said, well, Mr. Bean is really a child in a man's body. Hence, universal appeal. The late Nelson Mandela, who became, I think, the toast of the leaders in the Western world in the 1980s. Every Western leader was interested in him and what was going on in South Africa and the dismantling of apartheid. And he said, by analogy, if you want to know what a society's like, what values they have, if you want to test the morality of a society, just go out and look at the children and see how they're getting along. And then a famous educator, European, she's Italian. Many of her schools are still around. I have 2 grandkids that are in this little school, and over in Thorncliffe, and I really think that she had something going in terms of her methods and the engagement and the tactile nature of different things. But she said that if our society is going to be saved, if we're going to improve, if we're going to get better, if we're going to reach our human potential, then we should actually pay attention to our children. I know there's lots of educators out there, and Albert mentioned something about Linda. I'll close with this, but I really find this one fascinating. There was a longitudinal study of kids in an inner city school in New York. And one of those kids went on to be a professor of education, let's say at McGill University in Montreal. And he was asked to give one of the convocation addresses at some graduation somewhere. And it was entitled The Special Case of Mrs. B. Mrs. B. So there were 3 primary school teachers in this inner city school that was not very well supported, and a lot of difficulty in the families of the kids who went there. And there was a longitudinal study of all the kids who went through this school. And after 25 years, let's say, they kind of put them in just three rough categories. Doing really well in Western North American society. Doing really well. Maybe they had jobs, maybe they were tradesmen or professionals or businesswomen. Those that were okay, they're out there, they might be a little bit on welfare, or, they might be struggling a little bit. So really good, average, and then not so good. Maybe in jail, maybe already dead, maybe have killed people, that category. So that's all they did. High, medium, and low. And the longitudinal study discovered that of these three teachers, for some reason, all of these students who came under the influence, all the children who came under the influence of Mrs. B, statistically, they were way in these two categories. Not that they all were, but there was a huge correlation between her style, which was, of course, nurturing kids, paying attention to them, wondering about their parents, making sure they had the basic skills of writing and reading, being concerned about their nutrition, being concerned about their safety, maybe becoming a virtual mother because maybe their own mothers weren't there or they were in hard times. So if they were to ask me where the educational dollars should go, whether it should go to the universities and all the wonderful research they're going to, or the high school science and math teachers, I think I'd say no. Put your best resources on those first few grades. That's going to be the most important thing. The world today has a lot of kids. If you look at the demographics of our world, and it's always been this way, is that most of the people are under the age of, let's say, 10. That's changing a bit as we get a bit better in healthcare, as we are living longer, and as we're having fewer kids. But if you think about how we treat kids or how we understand them, how do we value kids globally? Here's one stat. A quarter of the children who are born have no registration. They're not just undocumented. They're kind of totally unregistered. They might have a name, and that's it. To do with healthcare, this applies to the whole population, but about just under 1/2 of the world doesn't have water, soap, or basic things for hygiene. Here's the world, and here's the density of where most of the under 14s live. So the dark colors, those represent over 45%, those dark blue ones, and the lighters are between 10 and 15%. So as you can see, the most kids are in the place where there's the most difficulty in terms of basic health. We haven't begun to speak about globally the rates that children are in labor. Now that's been changing radically, but all over the world, including Europe, the child labor hours per hours worked per week were horrendous. Not to talk about the sex trade that's going on. So I think our world, in terms of children, we don't really think of them as our future. We don't really take care of them as if they are the most important part of our society. Jesus wouldn't give us a passing mark, any society, especially going back a few generations, even Western civilization that we think is so great. Matthew says that children were brought to him. They weren't just walking, they were brought, and I'm assuming because of just the history of humanity, and it's not true always, but those who generally are found carrying children or children at their feet? It's usually the woman of the world. That's the general case. I know of opposite cases where the husband is doing all the nurturing and the wife is out there on Bay Street. But I just had a few little photos here that help us to remind us that it's the women who are giving the care, that's their vocation. They are the ones bringing the kids to Jesus. I'm pretty sure that's who it was. One of our late elders, Matt Wilkes, who's left here, that's him there in his mother's arms. That's him before he had his heart surgery. So we have a great healthcare system, and we can save a lot of kids. But our world doesn't really value this nurturing kind of work where usually mothers take their kids and they want the best for their kids. It's just a simple matter of economics. Most people who decide, and they can decide, to go back to work, we can hire other people, usually women, often maybe new immigrants. We can hire them to look after our kids. And that's because we don't need to pay them very much. We generally need to pay the minimum wage or maybe even less. So I'm just making the observation that how much do we value our kids when we actually give the caregivers of our kids, the full-time ones in daycare or stay-at-home moms or whatever, we pay them nothing or we pay them the minimum wage. That's what we do. That's our society. These are the ones who actually could see the value of bringing their kids to Jesus. They just believed that if he touched them, if they were close to him, it was going to be good for them. That's a very good thought. I don't think that children, just by their state, are all saved. I don't think that they're all perfect. I don't believe they're innocent at all. If you have had kids, you know they are not innocent. They're the most selfish persons maybe ever, for good reason, because they want just to survive. So the women are bringing their kids, their babies, to Jesus because they want his blessing. They want him to make them healthy. They want him to say, I love these kids, and I'd like to care for them. In contrast to that, the men, the ones who were close to Jesus, the closest, they saw this happening, and they weren't neutral about it. They actually rebuked. And if you look up the word rebuke, if you look up photographs of the word of anything to do with rebuke, it's usually a photo that looks like this. It's a man with his finger out, pointing and wagging it at some other person and saying, you're in trouble. This, I believe, was Chris Wallace, Fox News journalist, and it was to do with a debate with Mr. Trump, I think, and he was chastising someone for doing something. This is a fellow from the Scottish Parliament, and he is rebuking the leader of the ruling party. This could be anyone on the street, someone that you meet in the Costco parking lot, and you've taken the parking spot, whatever it is, just saying, you can't do that. You're in trouble. So that was the response of those who were closest to Jesus. The mothers probably were bringing them, and they just said, no. This isn't part of his program. This doesn't fit in with his schedule. He's too important for this, or we don't want you to bring them. There is C.S. Lewis wrote a lot of essays. He wrote one, or he gave a speech while he was at Oxford called The Inner Ring. And in this essay, he points out a fatal flaw in most of us. So here's the ring. And there's something to do with the inner ring. And here's what it is. Inside the ring are a population of people. They may have got there through crime and have a lot of money and a lot of beautiful people. They may actually be there because they have a lot of intrinsic value. They have the resources that the society wants, and they've worked hard at it, and they can really do their craft extremely well. And they're in. They are the ones featured in the covers of the magazines. They are the ones with the most of the resources that people want. They have achieved the American dream. And then there's the outside. There's the little people. There's people maybe like us who would like to get inside, would like to get the ticket so they can actually pass the bar, whatever it is, in order to get your iron ring, whatever that is, to get selected for the all-star team. Whatever it is, they want in, because in is where it's at. And then, by luck or by bad morals, or actually by excellent morals, either, they get inside. So now those that were out are now in. And guess what? There's other people who want in, just like those people. Now that you're in, what do you think of others coming in? They're not as smart as, they didn't work as hard as I did. I am much, much more competent in investing than that guy is. That is the curse of the inner ring. And we, I think, all have it. We would prefer not to let people in to the good thing we have, because maybe it makes us less special, maybe it's going to water down the talent, whatever it is. Once we're out, we want to be in. Once we get in, we don't want to let anyone else in. That's the syndrome, I believe, that the disciples had. They were in the inner circle. They ate with him, they walked with him, they heard him, he taught them, and they didn't want the lowest class people actually getting direct time with their master, with their Lord. So Jesus said, let the children come to me. So there's something about kids, and I'm just going to list off a few things that came to my mind. There is something about a child that is so valuable that Jesus says, if you don't have that, if that's not part of who you are, if that's not your value, then you aren't in the kingdom. And you can't get in because you don't have the right values. Your culture is not, it's not compatible with the values of the kingdom. So here are a few things that I think map or correspond to aspects of our faith in Jesus. Coming to him, staying with him, living with him, growing with him. I think these are some values that children have kind of by nature. Not all children, but just on the whole, globally, all the kids. Children, remember, children are the ones who we think are playing. Remember, we're working and they're playing. And many educators believe that we learn through playing. These were two kids I took a photo of at the Millennial Park in Chicago. They have a huge wall there that changes, a huge pond. And who's in the pond? Only the kids. No adults are in there, no old people. Only the kids are there, and they don't care if their diaper's falling down. They're just there. They're just they're enjoying their environment. So with kids, there's just this kind of natural joy. They have space around them. They're not worried about what's going to happen tomorrow. They're out there running and engaging in the world, and they seem to have a little bit of smile on their face and the wind's in their face, and they're just moving around in God's green earth. They're not concerned about the global issues of overpopulation, of crime, of sexual abuse, of climate change, of racism, all of the things that we worry about and have conferences about and try to fix them, and we haven't fixed them, and probably we can't fix them. The kids are not into that. They're into their little space. They don't care about how they look either. They don't care whether, like their face, their nostrils they don't care if their teeth aren't right or the right shape or the right color or there's some, they just don't care. They just want to express who they are, and they do it. They stick out their tongues quite a bit. I don't know whether maybe adults thinks that that's funny, but kids don't really care. They don't care what you think about them. They just are expressing who they are. They're just freely moving around, and it's too bad that you've got to come in when your mom calls you. You have to come in when the street lights come on. There are some restrictions, but apart from that, you're out. You're out, you're doing your things. Now, maybe they're more in doing their screens, which is too bad. That's too bad. That's, I think, anti-culture. That's not a culture of the kingdom. These are people who are God's creation, engaging with God's creation and enjoying it, and in a simple way, kind of worry-free, if I could say that. There's a lot of talk about racism. I've just read a book all about racism and the madness around racism and the difficulty of racism and how hard it is to even talk about racism. Doesn't matter who you are, it is extremely difficult. Even using the word colorblind, which I thought might be a goal for the world, to be somewhat colorblind, meaning, hey, this carpet is green and that camera is black, and some cameras are different colors, but the idea that when we meet someone, the race isn't the first thing that kind of engages us, but rather that they're humans, that they have feet and arms and hands like we do, that they have to shovel the snow like we do, like they have to go to school like we. You just meet people because they're humans. And I think children are the best at this. I'm not saying that children don't notice. I'm not saying that children aren't mean. But if you want to look at the best example of just humans who seem to be just getting along, and maybe they're going to fight over something, who gets the biggest piece, but they're not going to be automatically looking and saying, you look funny, or you talk funny, or you're ugly, or whatever it is. Children are kind of like that. They see that other people are in the kingdom just like them. And that's just the way it is. Children are learners. They're curious. The question's why? Why? My youngest grandson, we were playing the Messiah. He was 2 and a bit. And he said, what are they singing about? He was 2 and a half. Children are by nature extremely curious. My favorite is the 2s. Just seeing how God created humans and the development of speech and language and vocabulary. And now you find out this is kind of an adult who has a lot of thoughts, and some of them are quite abstract. Kids love to learn. I was in New Zealand a few years ago, and this was a Catholic school that my 3 grandkids were going to, and they invited me in, and I gave a little talk about insects. And this girl was just so proud that she had this little drawing that she scribbled of an insect that she found outside. This is my late son, John. We were at some fall fair up in Deep River, and there's a man doing his craft, and yeah, the adults weren't that close. They weren't, they're standing back. They didn't want to bother the guy. They didn't want to sort of, create a problem. But John, like thousands of other kids, they're curious. People in God's kingdom are curious. They want to know more. They want to understand. They want to ask Jesus why. Kids can think. They think, they understand there are problems in the world. Everything's not just great. They do have fights, sometimes quite bad fights. But they're aware that the world around them isn't perfect. Kids have no problem with the right kind of adults. No problem at all. We were at the Leaside Hill doing sledding just a few, I think we could go last Friday, and Wesley, Sarah and Steve's eldest, he's the guy there like with the orange thing. He all of a sudden hooks onto this other middle-aged man who's sledding with his son, and they become a trio. He's just there with them, talking about films and all kinds of stuff. So kids have no problem interacting with someone who is maybe a bit older than them, or different, or maybe has a different place and order like in the world. And kids can do a lot of things. Children are actually extremely talented, extremely gifted. These were two buskers that Alison and I saw in Stratford. We went to see, I think it was Barrymore, the late Christopher Plummer did that one-act thing in Stratford, and here were two kids. There was an online Bach violin concerto, and the concertmaster from the TSO was there, and he put out a challenge. Hey, you do your part, and I'll do my part, and we'll do the concerto together. So we had all kinds of people submitting their rendering. Anyone could do it. And the finalist or the one who got chosen was a young Asian girl. Maybe she was 5 or 6. And I saw her. Remember, I'm trying to get a few notes together on my euphonium. She is just tearing it up. She might want to apply for some symphony, and she's like 6 years old. Natural, she waits, she comes in. He says, okay, 3 bars, and then I'm going to come in. She starts, just unbelievable. And that's something to do with children. We have amazing potential because we're made in God's image. And so Jesus did what they asked him to do. He was quite happy to lay his hands on them, touch them. Humans are tactile. Kids love to be touched. Remember, adults, we have a problem with space, generally. We don't like people that are too huggy. We like distance. Do the following experiment. Talk to a friend and then start getting closer as you're talking. And there's about a 5-millimeter difference that if you get too close to someone, in our culture, it's really uncomfortable. You feel very, very awkward. Kids aren't like that. So, to what extent are we, us sophisticated, intelligent, well off in our resources, with our salaries, to what extent are we willing to become like these kids and just throw away all of the things that have really been driving us all of our lives, that the school system has told us these are the values, that the workplace has told us these are the values? How many of us are willing to take on the values that kids have? a sense of innocency, a sense of understanding they're very small people in the world, a sense of they have no rights. They don't clamor about rights, not too much. I mean, if someone steals something from them or if someone gets someone bigger, they think they have a right to it. But generally, they're just there. What part of our life is your life preventing you from coming fully to Jesus? What is there something that you just think is too much for you to give up? I know for me, it's the intellectual barrier that I don't think I need to pray about that anymore because I've prayed for 30 years and it hasn't happened. So intellectually, academically, I can kind of deal with that, and I just don't get close to Jesus about that anymore. We don't talk about it because it's just seems to be that's just the way it is. Maybe it's God's sovereign will. That's keeping me, I think, from getting closer to Jesus. What are your inner circles? What are the things that have driven you to put all of your time and energy and effort into so you can be in there? Because in there is not part of the kingdom. Part of the kingdom is taking on the values of Jesus, that he's your king, that he himself was lowly, that he himself was able to connect with children extremely well. And he actually said, these are my people. These are the kind of people who are actually part of my kingdom. They're not maybe educated. They've not gone to school yet. They have no resources. They are a health risk. The highest death rate, of course, is in the first of all, just getting born. The first year. Now, we've made amazing progress on all these fronts. Good for us. That's good. But the risks are still the highest for the most vulnerable. I want to close. I've spoken a bit too long. This is just a scripture that came to mind. Because I remember the incarnation is Jesus came from his Father's place. He came from a loving place, an infinite place, a place of everything that is in our souls that we think would be paradise. He came from there, and he entered into a dusty part of our world. And he came as a child. His family was poor. His father maybe died. And so this might have been what he looked like at some part of his life. I don't know. But I'm just going to leave this thought with you that Jesus himself became a poor child, was willing to do that, and was willing to undergo all of the abuse that poor people do. And he was killed. And he died on the cross in order that through faith and trust in him, belief in him, that we might become rich. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought that it's the grace of God that moves everything. Rebuke is not grace. Being inside and not wanting someone else to come in is not grace. Grace is kindness. Grace is unmerited invitation. And it's the fact that God loves you irrespective of where you've come from and irrespective of what you look like and what diseases you might have and how terrible things have been done to you. So I'm going to invite you to come to Christ, to believe in him at whatever level that is. You may have made a profession of some kind, but I'm going to invite you to come into the fullness of the grace of the King, and come as a child, if it's possible. I think it's very hard in our world to do that, because all the values of kids never really move up to the very top. Thank you for listening.